This is exciting times as we watch the project technology, I'll call it the technology stack, increase. My background, I've been working with projects since, good Lord, actually 1988. So that's a long time to be dealing with the DOS version of Microsoft Project. And it's been really fun, even just supporting or even sponsoring or starting MPUG chapters over the years, both locally and abroad. So I'm excited today to really kind of help you guys dig in around learning how to take advantage of this technology and just really supporting our community of practice. So quick recap today for some of our presentation agenda, and that is I definitely want to cover some of the pain points that people wrestle with around communication issues. As you certainly know that you could spend a lot of time, in fact we could spend more than an hour talking about how different types of communication components, and certainly as we look at leveraging the technologies that are available in Project Online, or Project Server, you really do have a rich series of offerings. And so today I've kind of selected some very key elements to support best practices with the capabilities. I'm just going to talk briefly about some future capabilities coming out from Microsoft. And as an MVP and as a gold partner and part of the advisory council, this is always something that we just get very excited as at being working on the next release, is that there's some things coming and there's some things you can do to go learn and how to be prepared. So I'll talk about that around communication, because I think the richness of the product is going to continue to grow in ways that you've never seen before. So then we'll jump into doing live demo, because as I like to say, I'd like to really get in and actually show the technology as well as coming through there. And certainly we'll be taking questions. I'll kind of pause intermittently as we go through. So in terms of book writing and 20+ years of consulting in the industry, we find there's a lot of areas that you really just kind of jump into. And so I'm going to highlight some very key steps that might help you help make better decisions in terms of communication, work, and process. So again, as we go through, whoops, why the slide's going backwards? It may be we want to make it go forwards. All right, fine. I will do it this way. Perfect. All right, so I'll zoom this out a little bit better so you guys can see this. But in terms of key communications, it's very important in terms of what we run into. And so commonly as we work with project, many of you probably have experienced the fact that senior executives or stakeholders are like, oh, really, a Microsoft project schedule, or the Gantt chart is so overwhelming. And so in terms of communication and leveraging the technology that you have with Project Server, Project Online, sometimes there's too much information, sometimes there's too little information, as well as getting into a place where you need timely, real-time, instant communication, or a quick and faster way to produce the information that you do need to see to communicate with either stakeholders above you or maybe team members who are below you, needing to know what they're working on. I'm sure some of you have experienced the fact that not everybody is sitting in the same building, and so we have co-location issues where maybe people are scattered across the globe. They might be in different time zones. And so having access or accessing information isn't always about simply posting, sharing, or at least copying and pasting a schedule. That's really kind of leveraging what we call the better together story to help you kind of work through that. Now again, over the years, in fact, talking about many, many years of watching Project mature and grow, one of the things that Project was very good at doing was giving you excellent views. But when it came to like printing or output reporting, Microsoft continued to kind of chip away at this model. And as we look at from basically 2010, 2013, 2016, and even moving into the online, which is we call the evergreen environment, we are going to see significant advancements in these areas. But again, there's still a need for better, quicker, faster reporting. And while this session is not just to spend time on reporting, I want to cover some key elements that will help make your reporting or communications better. Again, from a project, program, or portfolio management, we talk about the need for having quick, visible accountability, again, that having roll-up information or in some cases roll-down information. And one of the things that you're going to see is kind of an evolution around the visibility in terms of making and modeling information. So it's not just going to be stuck in project. We're going to talk about some of the Office 365 components that are going to be coming as well. That just says maybe the project schedule is a little heavy for what we're trying to do, but yet we need to communicate and track some of the information that's being worked on or delivered. So whether you're doing work or work activities, one of the things that I encourage people to understand is that, you know, a tool is a tool is a tool. And of course, a fool with a tool is still a fool, and you may be producing some pretty interesting views or frustrating your stakeholders if you're not able to get to good information. So in terms of best practices, really following, whether it's a practical project lifecycle like waterfall, or if you're in kind of a Prince 2 approach, or maybe you're even doing an agile approach, meaning you might have a Scrum, or you might be into other types of flavors of an agile, or maybe it's a blended approach, is that really the layout of your schedule is going to be helpful. In terms of leveraging good process and templates, things like that will speed up and help us. So let me bring up project for just a moment. I'm going to talk about just the idea that if you can start with a good template in terms of communications, it makes a huge difference. So for right now, I'm just showing a agile project schedule. In many cases, we find that we work in kind of a blended waterfall or some sort of a embedded technical or an iterative schedule, but really starting with a section that might have, your customer prioritization, or if you're thinking in terms of visibility, you might be dealing with story points and the state or what sprint it is. And by the way, one of the things that I usually encourage people to do is, if you like some of the templates that I've shown, feel free to email me directly. I'm happy to share these with you so you don't have to build them from scratch. But as we look in terms of visualization, is that having either an embedded agile project template, or perhaps even just something that's kind of lined out in a way that says organize this in a Kanban approach. You're going to find that you can quickly sort, filter, and group. And the idea is that this is a database, and that you can really present information quickly and efficiently, not just for you, but also by your stakeholders or anything that you want to work with. And so treating project like a flat file doesn't quite work in really maximizing communication. And that includes if you're kind of in a waterfall approach. In many cases, laying out your project in a life cycle, or sometimes we call it Scrummerfall or Wagile. You may have kind of that hybrid blend. Is that having and starting with a good communication schedule template is going to help. Now, I'm going to dig into some tips, tricks, and shortcuts around things like this, but again, if I'm modifying my schedule and I want to see indicators change, if I want to see text values, having something set up that allows you to visualize that, expand and collapse the detail is going to help streamline that communication. And to that endeavor, there's some real helpful elements that we work with in terms of modeling and forecasting data and data information. So as I kind of conclude the PowerPoint and begin to move into what I refer to as a little bit more of our future and then the actual clear steps in project, and certainly Project Online and Project Server, I want you to kind of step back for a moment and think about it's not just one tool. Right? We talk about cost modeling or cost forecasting or resource activities in terms of what we see in project. So the more we know about our tool or technology, the better we're going to be at taking advantage of that. And as you're going to be thinking in terms of the reporting, so for example, if you're in 2013 or 2016 or higher, Microsoft's added this wonderful report tab that allows you to go in and really start to create a canvas of reports and information that you can present. Of course, clicking on any of these reports brings up this nice pivot table over here where you're actually able to kind of see the data and a field list and kind of work and design that. So again, learning how to manage information, or at least pivot information, or if you haven't spent time in Excel charting and graphing, you're going to find that a lot of these are now embedded inside a project. And continuing that reporting or management story isn't just about having it in a local file, is that the whole idea of Project Online or Project Server is that we really are driving data from a local Microsoft project schedule into a relational database and then presenting that in a browser, meaning that you've got this kind of web story or web accessibility that allows people to sort, filter, and group or view that information. And I'll be spending some time in both the client and also in Project Online and Project Server to help you guys understand how to take advantage of some great communication tips, tricks, and shortcuts with this. But remember, your audience may not want to have project. They may need a subset of the information, or maybe they're in a mobile device. And what they're thinking about is really just trying to access, view, and present that information. So as we set the stage for communicating and making it quick and efficient, we're really going to drill into some elements that will help you start out with. So let me go back to project, good old project. We'll just kind of start here. And one of the tools that I certainly like is working in Project Professional. But again, whether it's Project Standard or Project Professional, you're going to find that there's a lot of ways that will help you begin to mature the information that you're presenting. So as I'm just kind of showcasing the screen here, one of the things that comes up is if you're working in a collaborative environment, meaning that you're selecting resources. One of the things that comes up very commonly is that, hey, listen, we actually can tap into social presence. So if you're moving to Link or Skype, you actually have the ability to connect and actually see social presence of resources that are assigned on your task. In fact, I can kind of hover over any one of these and see what's going on. In fact, if you look on my screen, and I'll just zoom this for you, is that down here you notice that I'm basically blocked out in red. And how am I getting my resources if I'm just working on a local file or I'm connected to that to actually show that social presence? Well, remember, if you have a resource sheet and if you are using Skype or Link here, the idea is that when you come into a resource, and I'll just pick on Anna for just a moment. So if I open up Anna, if you add the email address here, just literally that simple, adding that email address allows you to basically enable that if that feature is turned on in your work environment. So in many cases, a lot of team members or project managers will quickly start up a schedule, and they'll just kind of type in their resource names loosely. But just by adding that one column, whether you right-click and select Insert Column and just put in email address, you literally can go through here and actually fill out that information. And once you have that, as I sit back into my Gantt chart, or if I'm working in a place where I'm looking at resource information, I can kind of hover over this and say, hey, listen, I need to get an update from Anna. I'm wondering if that's still on track. I'm not waiting for a formal meeting. I'm actually immediately reaching out, and I can have a quick question. Hey there. And I hit enter, and let's see if Anna is available. Ah, she is. And I'll just say, hey, doing an MPUG demo, so no secrets here. And again, I could be asking about hours, I could be asking about work, I could be basically showcasing information. But the idea is that really we can have instant communication with people without having to get up, send them an email, or have basically a formal meeting set up in place. We find, especially as you're trying to quickly update, plan, and forecast work and hours, that this is a great tool for you to be able to work with. Again, just a little bit of information back in that resource sheet allows you to enable this. Certainly if you are taking advantage of the richer stack that Microsoft has, these pieces we're going to start finding does a little bit what we call better together. Now let's continue talking about some of the key elements that are helpful. And I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint for just a moment because I think what we want to understand is a little bit where is Microsoft going with our information. So if we think in terms of visualization or reporting, remember the project schedule tool, helpful as it may be, is only part of that story. So we talk about project, program, and portfolio management. There really are subsets that you're going to find that Microsoft is spending a lot of time and investment in, including what we call task management, work management, and of course still with the standard Project Online, Project Server, and Microsoft Project is what we refer to our program and portfolio management. But if you think about work management, meaning the ability to have a stakeholder, maybe a resource manager, quickly come in, get some information, or have a request process that says we can request work or work information from them for their resources. They don't necessarily want to be into a schedule, but yet they want to leverage that online story or a browser-based story to access some of that information. And as we get into kind of that conversation, the idea is that whether you're using a online access or project server, if you go into the 2016 environment, is that from a resource perspective, we really are kind of moving forward in a position where, as I look at my data or my data information, is that if I'm selecting resources, I can certainly just say, look, I just need to have a request process that says as I'm working with my resources, I really want to go into something called resource request. Now, I've written a blog article on this. I think I've done even some YouTube webinars on this, but it's kind of exciting to note that the idea is that there can be request, time-placed information, and also the ability for a resource manager to come in and very quickly and efficiently find out what is that capacity. So again, using the same information that you would build a schedule and hit publish is that you've got access to good views information. And while they may not be using fully Microsoft Project, they can certainly use a browser-based connection to kind of visualize some of those resource and work requests for anything that's part of their team. Again, great idea having access to that information and being able to manage that. Now with that, there are some things that are going to be coming out, and I recommend everyone, if you haven't done this already, go out and do a search for what's called the Office 365 Roadmap. And I know that John and many of the leaders in the project, basically the product group and project, have created presentations, even webinars, talking about some of the great new features coming. But from a communication perspective, the idea of being able to quickly pull up something in a mobile device or use a card and kind of a quick, rich design board, you can kind of manage communications without necessarily having to force it to be in a schedule. So while this is what's coming, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about that, I encourage people really to go out, take a look at what's being slated to be released here in the very near immediate future, something called Planner, and then of course Microsoft's recent acquisition of Wunderlist, which has another great task tracking and communication tool. So as we go into 10 tips and tricks for helping you kind of communicate better with project, we want to show that we can certainly get in, communicate faster, have some sort of a social presence, and then we're going to spend a little time here as I go through the product getting into what we call better visuals, better reporting, streamlining what you see on the screen or how you communicate that so you aren't overwhelming your stakeholders, and again, leveraging some of the out-of-the-box features that are available. Now, we also will talk just briefly about reporting because I want to get to a couple things that a lot of people have either forgotten about around quick and simple output, which in many cases may serve you well than trying to build a very complex report. And then I'll spend some time in that project online environment. So, as my wife says, less talking, more kissing. So let's get into our demo and take a look at what we've got here. So back to our Microsoft Project Professional environment. Again, this is a great little template here. It allows me to communicate messages if I'm slipping over a threshold of work, hours, or cost. But as we think in terms of what we want to do, one of the things that comes up very commonly is how do I present a visual either to me, the project manager, or to some of my team about inputs and outputs? And I'm always amazed at how many people really have not dug a little deeper than just the surface of project to find some great views that are available. So let me just give you an example. For example, if I'm on my task tab here and I bring up the details, a lot of us are very aware from old school that if you click on a task, you can certainly see the resources, you can see the hours, work, and assignment. But a lot of times what I like to do is I talk about inputs and outputs. Right, I'm looking at the inputs to an activity, or if I'm in a master project and I'm having maybe even multiple projects that have deliverables that go back and forth, I really want to see those inputs and outputs. So let me show you a little trick here that might help you in terms of both visually communicating what's happening. And no, I'm not going to go into the network diagram view, but I'm going to go down to more views. And this is one that a lot of people do not know about, or at least haven't even seen or taken a look at. It's called the relationship diagram view. And if I go ahead and select the relationship diagram view and just hit apply, again, I'm in a dual pane view. So we talk about having a top pane or a bottom pane. The idea is that if I click on any task in the top pane, what that's going to do is it's going to drive the bottom pane. And while you might have a great Gantt chart where you're out looking at schedules and activities and inputs and outputs, sometimes those tasks really jump all over the spectrum. So what this relationship diagram view does, especially from a visualization, it just says, hey, if this is a critical deliverable or a milestone, tell me what the inputs are. Think about that. What are the inputs? In the center, this is kind of the fields that we're actually looking at or selecting up above. In this case, I've highlighted it in blue so you can see that. And then I have 3 outputs that impact several different activities. And so as you click on the top pane row by row, it'll basically take you in or out. You can see inputs, you can see outputs, but the idea is that, again, you've got a great quick visual. And so it's kind of fun to say, hey, listen, if you haven't gone back and dusted off some of the views that are available, it's certainly very helpful to play with. Now, again, remember, from a dual pane perspective, there's several ways we can do this. The View tab always allows you to turn on your timeline view at the top, where you can quickly see a top pane, or if I click on details on the bottom, I can bring up the information, what we call our task form. And the view that we're showing right now actually is one of the most powerful views in Project. It used to be referred to as the task entry view, and so it actually was a combination of 3 views. The Gantt chart here on the right, the task sheet on the left, so if I actually just pull the slider all the way to the right there, I just have just the task sheet. And then, of course, we have the task form down below. Now remember, in a dual pane view, you can mix, you can match, you can have kind of a whole series of combinations. And I like to look at maybe resource information on the top and a chart or a graph on the bottom. But also reports, you've got some of the same flexibility. Now, one of the things that comes up quite commonly when we talk about these views is a lot of people forget the fact that, remember, when a form is brought up, it doesn't always just mean that that's what you have to see. So if you can right-click or if you can double-click, you should be able to edit or format or at least get into changing the view that you're working with or at least drilling into those activities and task assignments. So in this case, if I click on Resources and Predecessors, I can very quickly change the details on my screen to show hours, work, units. If I want to go into the schedule, looking at any leveling or delay or when my resources are starting, or maybe I'm just more interested in looking at work, actual work, and remaining work in terms of tracking information. Again, each row that you click in the top will drive the bottom. So again, from a communication perspective, one of the things that are helpful for you is just make sure you're maximizing your views and your view information. Now, yesterday I was on a call, and we had a person from finance that was asking about time phase cost planning. And so I took them over to our resource usage view, and I said, you know, you're aware that you can actually look at both tasks or resources and kind of see the burn rate of what's happening. And they had no idea that just with a few clicks in terms of massaging your view is that you can right-click and certainly go in and say, hey, from a communication or visualization perspective, I can actually turn on cost. And while they weren't really worried about the hours, they were looking at kind of the burn. And if it was by week or by month or by quarter, if you set up your resources or if you've got cost resource information put in on your task, you can quickly forecast and model that. Again, we're talking about details, just kind of right-clicking on any view that you have and allowing you to massage that information. Again, from a visualization perspective, sometimes people do get overwhelmed. And the Gantt chart tends to be one of those that when people start working, they go, oh my goodness, there's so much detail here. I'm really going to struggle with how much data I'm presenting. So let me show you a couple tricks that may help you save and communicate as well as export and create visuals or reports that are helpful in terms of information. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the desensitization of your information. Meaning that when I start building a schedule, right, if I start working or managing work, assignment, and task, a lot of you notice that from 2010 or higher is that you get this wonderful red figure here, affectionately named ROGG for R-O-G-G, red, overallocated guy or gal. And if you right-click on that, you can certainly go into something called the Task Inspector that allows you to essentially take a look at that particular task. Tells you inputs, outputs. It also tells you the driving resource or perhaps which resource is the one that's over allocated. Gives you some options, and it certainly has a checkbox here. In fact, let me zoom that for you, that you can turn this off. That says, hey, listen, if you don't want to see that warning, and that Tim Runcie guy, he's always complaining, you can check the box and basically make that disappear. But one of the things that people don't know is that instead of trying to drop your resources in here, or if every single row has a red overallocation figure, in terms of desensitizing people to the fact that if they haven't gone in and maybe trued up their schedule, or at least maybe there's someone's working, 9 hours in a day, you don't need to stop the whole project because they're overallocated. If you go up to the Resource tab, we talk about kind of visualizing the information that we're working with. You're in a position where you can actually control the level of details that you see here. So let me just open a few of these up and I'll just show you. I've got quite a few red figures here, and if I go into that Resource tab, well, I personally am not a huge fan of turning on what we call leveling. What I do want to show you is that by default, most people start with this day by day. In fact, if you go check your settings, the default in project is that the resource threshold for overallocation really shows up day by day. And so I just set mine to day by day, and you notice that I have quite a few more red overallocation figures that says, hey, listen, on any given day, if they work more hours, or if they happen to, maybe be double booked. Let's say we have 2 meetings scheduled for a morning or an AM session. Because remember, project tracks things down to the minute if you really need to, is that you can actually have a lot of what I call false positives. So I encourage people to come into the Resource tab, go over to Resource Leveling, and just set that to week by week. And when you click on OK, what we're really looking for is when somebody's actually working more hours, or perhaps the overallocation exceeds their capacity within a week period, and that will give you a little bit of a better threshold. Again, we don't want executives or senior managers or stakeholders to constantly see a barrage of information. The idea is that we're trying to present good data and then also kind of have a zero in on what needs to be done in terms from a visualization. So again, using that in terms of desensitization of what I call ROJ, very helpful in terms of a planning perspective. The next is, very commonly I find people working in project and they say, well, I have to insert columns and then I go print that and then I got to take them back out and then resize everything. And so if you're not aware of what are called tables, the idea is that if you go and you right-click in this upper left-hand corner, you can actually create a series of tables, whether they're enterprise tables or they happen to be local tables in your project schedule, or if you save them to your enterprise global template or maybe even the local global template, is that you're in a position that says, hey, listen, if I want to look at my Agile data, where I'm looking at maybe customer need, and in this case, I only want to see my Agile tasks, so anything that's waterfall doesn't really track by story points, I can quickly massage my view, present the columns that I want to work with, and then turn that on or off by right-clicking in that upper left-hand corner. Jump over to my printing table. Hey, this is all I want to print. Don't need to see predecessors, successors. I just want to kind of look at the information that's being managed. Again, I can go back and forth between Agile, turn everything back on if I really need to, and again, right-click in that upper left-hand corner and go back to a dashboard view. Again, from a reporting perspective or communication perspective, what we do with this information is going to be helpful. And you're going to find that both views, exporting is going to be able to reference objects that you create. So if you go over to your View tab, of course, for those of you that are working with your ribbon from basically 2010, 2013, or 2016, or any version higher, is that you're going to find an opportunity to basically use Leverage Native or Build Custom. And what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit more about just kind of taking a table, and whether you want to copy it or if you want to save it or you want to move it is not so much how to edit and create the table itself. Very similar to Access is by selecting the type of fields that you want to see, choosing the order, and saving that. What I really want to talk about is, if we talk about speeding things up, is this organizer. The organizer allows you the ability to take anything that you create, basically a view, a report, a module, meaning if you're writing and recording macros. Again, here's those tables. And I can save them in from the file that I have them here directly into my local global template, meaning that every time I open a project, no matter where I'm at, I can actually have some of these native fields available or native tables, filters, calendars, or maps. So remember, the idea is that if you're working on one project and you create something that's helpful, you can certainly manage that. And again, from an enterprise perspective, if you're in Project Online or Project Server, we very much put these into our enterprise global template in terms of what we see. So the idea is that you want to standardize and then be able to reference that. And when you have a lot of project managers, for those of you that might be in a PMO or in a project control center, setting these up to do quick and efficient modification really is a matter of going into your server settings and building, deploying those. So if I go into my Project Online environment here, go to server settings, I'm in a position really where I may want to come in and actually say, hey, listen, I'm going to build an enterprise view or a field, or I'll open up the enterprise global and massage that directly. Again, I won't go into how to build these, but the idea is that if you're in the online environment, this becomes very quick and efficient in terms of both your tables, your lookup fields, your calendars, and certainly other types of views. Okay, let's go back to Project Pro for just a moment, and I want to continue the journey. Another element that comes in here, and I'm going to pause for questions in just a moment, is that people like to communicate, and maybe the Gantt chart is a great management tool, but more appropriately what they like to do is go over to their View tab and say, I like the timeline. And so the timeline has become a great product to help communicate. Well, remember, the idea from a timeline perspective is that this is actually a view. And what you put in this view, you certainly can move things around and change your milestones, but the view itself has been fed the activities that you're working with. So very commonly, certainly from a timeline perspective, is that some stakeholders are really not interested in having to rebuild or copy and put this out every time into Excel. So for example, if I go out and I want to copy this timeline, I can do that. But then I find people coming in, they remove all the tasks and they create a new timeline and then they print it, or they'll copy it and put it in PowerPoint, and they go through that process of actually taking and rebuilding this. And just the same way as I was talking about saying that you can create a table, is that you can actually have multiple timeline views. And the idea from a communication perspective is that I want to click and pick the timelines that I want. So in this case, watch this. I'm going to show you how to build one very quickly. And again, from a communication perspective, is that maybe I'm looking at some of the high-level summary activities, key milestones. It might be a stakeholder timeline. And then again, I might have a technical group or a products group or part of my manufacturing team that has another type of view that they need to see. So when I click on More Views here, I'm going to go ahead and select New. And you get the option to actually build single or combination views. So remember, this is a dual pane view that I'm showing right now, where we actually can take a custom view and put it into another view and make it a dual pane view. So we have a top and a bottom pane. For right now, I'm just going to make a single view, and I'm just going to go ahead and call this MPUG Timeline. The key here is to click on that drop-down arrow and look down at the bottom, very, very, very bottom. I'll just kind of zoom this so everybody can see this a little bit better, is that you want to go grab from the very bottom the timeline view. Once you have that, which, here we go, I click on OK, and if I select Apply, what I could do is now have this empty blank timeline. Now the idea is that if there's things that I want to kind of promote or put up there, I might just want to right-click and say, you know what, I'm going to add this to my timeline. Or let me collapse a couple of these sprints. Maybe this is my IT backlog, and I want to give kind of people an idea of what's that. Let me go ahead and add these to my timeline, and then I'll do my development sprints and add that also to my timeline. And whether you drag that and pull that up there, and let's say we'll display this as a call out, and then I'm going to do a little formatting of my existing view here. So we'll make that different colors, and just for grins and giggles, I'll make a purple one here, change the font to a nice white color, yada beep, bada boom, there we go. All right, so I got a timeline. Now, what's valuable about this is watch. Instead of just being stuck with the same timeline that you have to build and manage, I can actually communicate different key values by choosing that view. So again, if our goal is to communicate whether I'm putting it into PowerPoint or I have different stakeholder audience, is that just with a little bit of knowledge, you can kind of speed up the process of how you want to communicate and manage that information. Again, multiple timeline views. Now, I'm going to show some other tips and tricks to the client that I'm going to be rolling into some of the outputs, taking information out of project, and then we'll be jumping into our online environment. But this might be a great time to maybe pause for questions. Any questions?
Tim, I don't see any questions coming through at this point, but we can give them a couple more seconds. If anyone has any, to go ahead and submit those via the chat question feature on the GoToWebinar panel.
Either I'm very good at walking people through this, or I've put them completely to sleep.
Yeah, it looks like we don't have any questions at this point, so you can go ahead and move on. If anyone does have questions, feel free to submit those during the second half here, and we'll try to answer them at the end.
No problem. Okay. Now, again, we're talking about communication, right? So the idea of information in your schedule and having this wonderful relational database is a great opportunity to work from. But one of the things that we tend to find is that some people do want to actually drill into the schedule, and they want to communicate a timeline with maybe a little bit more information. Of course, the default in Microsoft Project is that it puts the resource names. And if you have maybe a key stakeholder delivery that needs to be done, and everyone has, you know, to attend a meeting, and you put everybody's name on it, then what you have is this little tiny, maybe half-an-inch task showing up at the Gantt chart, and then you have 40 inches of people's names running all the way to the right. So one of the things I encourage people to do is that remember, you're never stuck just with the default options. And if you can remember how to right-click and double-click, you certainly can go here and make some modifications. So one of the things I'm going to show you right now is, in many cases, it's not just about the resource information. Right now I have my baseline and I have a few other things turned on here. So let me go up and let's just kind of clean this up a little bit. So I'm going to go over to my, well, let's just go to Format here. And for right now, I'll just turn off my baseline. Again, from a 2013 and 2010 and any version higher than that, 2016, you're going to find that you can manage this. But if you look at my screen, I'm still showing resource information basically on the right of every bar. So if I right-click and I go into something called bar styles, and again, remember, if you think in terms of formatting, when you go to that Format tab up at the top here, we really are seeing that the ribbon is laid out by a functional area. It's no longer the menus and toolbar buttons that we had back in pre-2000 or 2007 days is that we've really got it organized in a functional area. So instead of approaching things from a verb or an action perspective, it's laid out by a noun, meaning that if I'm working with tasks, I click on task. When I work with resources, I click on resource tab. And of course, if I want to do a little formatting here, I find a lot of the context. But I have people say, you know, I want to come in here and I want to kind of format the text. I just don't want to show this information. Well, because the text is actually embedded to the bar, the idea is that you can format an individual bar or bar styles. So in this case, if I right-click out into the white background, I can select bar styles, or from the Format tab, choose from Format, is that you can come in and click on any one of the objects, meaning that you can control critical tasks, non-critical, summary, and people maybe have done some of that formatting where they change the shape at the beginning, at the end, and somewhere in the middle, and you go through the process of applying formatting. But don't miss this little tiny section here to the left called text. In many cases, if I'm really wanting to know where something's at and I want to put %complete, or if I click on the right and I have a custom field that I have, maybe the schedule slip or the work slip or the cost slip or anything that I want to put out there, I can make happen. So in this case, if I even want to come through my table structure, and I'll just type the letter C for cost, you'll see it jumps in here, is that I can say for every task, I want to see %complete on the left and cost on the right. And when I click on OK, I can quickly format and change that layout to display that information. Now, a lot of people get excited and go, yep, I know about adding the text before, after, middle, above, below, a bar. And of course, remember, you can split a bar into multiple pieces. But if I go back up to text styles, now since we actually have text applied to the bar, we're in a position where we can come in and actually do a little bit of formatting around that. So think of it this way. If I'm going to start working directly in my environment and I want to say, well, you know, the font's not very big, or I want to change that, when you go to text styles, remember you have to click on the drop-down arrow up at the top here. And I want to emphasize this because back in the old days, meaning pre-2007, you didn't get any levels of undo. In fact, you got one level undo and sometimes none. And people would come in here and they would forget and they would change the font for all their columns and rows, and you really couldn't undo this. Well, you can undo it now, but what you want to look at is right here. You can choose where you want the bar text to be formatted to. So for example, if I want to say cost, bar text left, nope, bar text right, put the cost on the right there. I want to make that color, let's make it a vivid green, and I'm going to make it bold, and boy, I'm going to choose a different font. Why don't we go ahead and choose Showcard Gothic. There we go. I can barely read it. And if I click on OK, what I'm going to see is you can apply formatting, both font, color, and size, to the bar itself. So again, we're really talking about that communication presentation layers, that there's a lot of little hidden tricks nested inside your tool. And if you haven't played with these, it's certainly helpful to do so. Again, using that bar and bar styles. Again, something else that comes up very commonly is that we talk about deadlines. So remember, a deadline in a project, instead of hard coding a constraint, is that if a task, for example, my task interview resources for timelines, has a deliverable, and if my deliverable is displayed out here, and if I go past that, I can see in my project schedule that I get these visual notifications telling me that I've slipped past a deadline. Well, me personally, one of the things that I like to do is I don't like this soft, fuzzy, warm timeline view where I actually go out into the bar styles and I see this green arrow. What I want is to see the big flaming tower of death. And so while Microsoft hasn't added the flaming tower of death icon for us to use quite yet, remember, if you click on a bar, you can actually come in and say, you know, I'd like the shape to be a little bit different. And from a visualization or communication perspective, I want people to spot this. And so now, by selecting the object, clicking on OK, I can spot those much easier where's my critical deadline. Again, you can put text on these. Again, it's an object. We can have text left, right, top, bottom. But again, the idea is that you can use that. And whether you're printing the Gantt chart or exporting some of that information or at least visualizing it, you've got a great tool to kind of share case and share that information. Now, I'm making this kind of a mess of my Gantt chart or my project schedule. In a minute, I'm going to be leaving a project and talking about taking data out of here. But I find that many cases that people who started working with 2010 or higher, or basically if you're in 2010 or higher, they forget the fact that instead of trying to do an export or run a complex filter to kind of drop data into another environment, is that copy and paste still works excellently. In fact, in many cases, people say, hey, Tim, I just quickly want to do a view, and if I'm going to go to, let's just present our Agile schedule for a moment. If I want to come in here and say, listen, I want to find all our story points, and I just want to make sure that I've got everything that's at least 23, 24, 25, and I want to kind of get this out, whether it's feature-based or activity-based, or if I want to go to the customer need, meaning I want to find all my high-priority activities, and I click on OK, is that taking this information out can be very efficient. And so remember, we talked about building a table. Right? If we create a table and you've got an Agile table or you create a visualization that allows you to manage that, you literally could just come up here, or if you really wanted to, is highlight your data and go over here and click on Copy. In this case, I'm just going to throw this into Excel so you can see this for just a moment. But that's not the only part of just taking your data out and putting it into a grid or into a Word table. But the idea is that I've got some visual information I can present. So while Excel is opening up here, we'll just go to a blank sheet. There we go. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste. Nothing fancy here. So I just do a copy paste. Now while that doesn't seem very awe-inspiring, let's take a look at a couple things here that you may want to think about in terms of putting your data out. So if I'm looking at kind of my rows and columns, you'll notice that it did include indentation for us. It kept the column headers, and I can quickly drop this out into Word, PowerPoint, Excel, or even into an email. So whether I'm not having to build a report, or maybe you're not in Project Online where team members can actually just come in and see what they're assigned to, progress those activities, taking information out is certainly a helpful tool. Now, one thing that a lot of people have forgotten about, and this is something that is very old school, and I wanted to bring this up, is that in some cases, maybe you're not wanting to drop it into a spreadsheet. What you're really looking at doing is trying to capture maybe a little bit more rich information. And you're going to say, I'm trying to find all the things that Anna's assigned to, and I need to get some feedback from her. So let me go in here. With my column, I'll go ahead and just select Anna, and I'll click on OK. And I can see that some of this stuff's pretty yellow here, so you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and highlight some of that information. And in fact, I don't need predecessors, so I'll just take that out. But instead of just kind of copying and pasting that, do you remember something that was called Copy Picture? In fact, it used to be a button on the old toolbars, and it had a little camera button. Well, Microsoft Office is kind of merging all the copy and paste functionality into the individual copy function from the button perspective. So the idea is you don't have different buttons on the ribbon. But if I click on Copy Picture, and I'm going to say, hey, listen, I either want to get a date range or maybe the rows I've highlighted. From a quick communication, I just want to send a note over to some of these people and say, hey, listen, could you provide some feedback? When I click on OK, and then let's go back to Excel for a moment. And let me just go ahead and paste this. Now, again, whether you want to do paste or paste special, the idea is that if I drop the artifact here, you can see that I can capture both the formatting, maybe the graphical indicators if you want, and it actually is transparent. So the idea is that your columns, or if I can shrink this up, some of our Gantt chart, you can actually see behind the information. So if I go here and just do a quick fill color, drag it over, you can actually see right through the part of the Gantt chart that you're working with. Again, it's a little nested trick that says, look, I just need a quick update on some of this stuff. I'll send you a picture. I don't have Project Online. I'm not in Project Server. These are great ways to just take your information out, communicate, and manage that directly. Okay, now let's hop into our online story. I know a lot of you are pretty excited or beginning to move through the process of working in either Project Online or Project Server. And something that comes up quite frequently is the fact that when people work in their project environment is that they also get the opportunity to have a SharePoint site set up for every project. So remember, if you build a Microsoft project, whether you do it through the template in the browser, edit it directly and save and publish, is that you can actually have a whole SharePoint site set up for that. And the idea of communication is that integration story, that better together story of saying I've got issues, risks, documents, and all related information is made accessible. And that's where most of the team members work anyway, is not necessarily in a schedule, but it's really around what happened, our meeting minutes, what was going on, what are our top issues and risks. Now while I'm sitting here and I'm showing a couple different projects, in fact, you'll notice that in the indicators column here, I see that there's issues, risks, and documents that are showing. If I drill into a project, again, remember, communicating with a view is just as powerful as trying to export the data out. So if I'm saying, look, I'm just going to have one version of the truth, I'm going to allow people to come in through the browser, click on a project, and actually come in and see schedule, strategic impact, different details. Again, I'm allowing that related database information to surface and be visible. Now what I'm going to do is, let me just click on edit for a moment. So I'm going to stay in the browser. But I'm talking about having to communicate maybe information that isn't in the schedule itself. And so this may be the greatest idea on earth, and we happen to have a project for the greatest idea on earth. And I notice that at the task level, if there's issues, risks, or deliverables, or documents, I actually have the ability to connect information that is in my SharePoint page directly to task in my schedule. And so for the idea of a drill down perspective, if I go back out and I look at red, yellow, green indicators as a stakeholder, and I want to drill in and I see red, yellow, green indicators on a project schedule, I may also want to know why something went from green to yellow to red. And whether it's a note or a document, is that if I click here, this is going to take us directly to the associated risk or issue or task or document to that task. Again, the whole idea is that from a project online or a product server perspective, is we've got this great SharePoint site kind of connected. And if I click on this, it's going to actually run me out there, and I can actually take a look at all the issues and all the risks. But the idea is that I'm actually showing the information. So here I just click directly on that issue and risk, and I can see that directly. Now, what I'm looking at is information that says, hey, this is the task, I've got a go, no-go decision, and this happens to be that information. If you look over here, I've got related deliverables, issues, and risks. And so I went directly to the object that I attached to my schedule. So from those who have maybe used earlier versions of Project or Project Server, with the, or maybe even some of the Project Online, is that people say, you know, I remember seeing issues, risks, and documents on the ribbon, but now when I go back in and I start working with my information, I don't see that when I go into my project. In fact, if you come up here and you click on the Project tab, you can see issues, risks, and documents and deliverables, but these aren't tied to your task. This is really kind of giving the overall project issues and risks. The idea is that if you really want to add something directly to an activity, saying, hey, listen, as I'm looking at kind of these work and work activities, I really want to put something on that particular project. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and take our project, and I'm going to go to identify product and process steps required for manufacturing of the greatest idea on earth. If you go to the Options tab, you're going to see an item here called Related Items. And I'll just zoom my screen for a second so you can see this a little bit better. Right here is really where you want people to go, right? We want to say, let's go ahead and click on that Related Items. Now what this is going to do is it's going to spin up another tab. But basically, if you want to, you can actually have it open up another tab, because we're drilling into that task and we're saying, what are the one or multiple related items? And so if you click on Add Related Item, there's a little bit of a link here for it. This is kind of exciting, is that it doesn't have to come from just the project SharePoint site. In fact, maybe you have a series of projects that you have interdependencies. So the view that opens up allows you to look at some of the other projects that you would have access or visibility to. And of course, as I scroll down in my view here, you can see I can see my SharePoint site and my SharePoint related objects in terms of issues, risks, or documents. If I click on risks, or if I wanted to go look at another project, the same thing would happen, is it takes me right into this library where I can see what they are. Now if you click on any one of these, you can actually go in and edit them, or if you want, you can even on the fly add a new issue, risk, or certainly attach a document to that. Very subtle. Now let me just zoom this so you guys can see this a little bit better. So you have to kind of look for that little formatting right there. So if you look at the words, it'll say click to add new item. As you highlight or click on any one of these, in the lower portion of your screen, what it's going to do is give you which item number you're selecting, and that's helpful. And all you have to do is click on Insert, and what this is going to do is going to say, hey, listen, I know that my tech team, if they run out of coffee, we are in deep trouble. So let me close this, and now that I've attached that item, I'm going to save and publish my schedule, and then we're going to come back out. So let me go back here. We'll go back to our project. I think what I'll do is I'll just publish all at the same time, since save and publish are kind of merged together. Don't have to hit save, then hit publish. You can just hit publish, let it go through that process. So now I'm doing this in Office 365 into Project Online. We could do exactly the same thing if we wanted to directly in a Project On-Premise implementation. Again, here's an example of that. There's not going to be any difference between those two, but the idea is that bringing that information back, so let me close this, and I'll check it back in, is that I'm in a position that if I want to start linking and telling that story, is that I can connect related objects from my SharePoint site or related objects from other SharePoint sites, and I can actually see that visual information. So again, if I went back in here as a stakeholder, I might want to come back in and say, aha, here's the greatest idea on earth project. Notice that it's red here in the health. What's going on? I can click on it as a stakeholder, come in with view permissions, and depending on what views that we want to create, again, remember we can build views that's basically just like our tables in our project schedule that narrow down what columns people see, what's filtered, what's included. And as I open these up or expand or collapse the value of the information that's available, you can see now the identify process steps now actually has a risk associated. It's attached. If I click here, it'll take us right out into our SharePoint site. So again, the idea of linking and having an integrated story in terms of communication really helps people keep that information threaded together, and so they can follow the breadcrumbs, if you will, up or down from, hey, why has that gone from green to yellow to red, or what's happening, why is that slipping, or at least communicating with information both from a SharePoint site to your project schedule to an online story. So great opportunity for you guys to play with this. Why don't we pause, take a few questions, and then we can kind of wrap up for the day.
All right.
Any questions?
Yeah, we do have some questions here. One came in right after our last break, so it might backpedal a little bit, but it's from Scott, and he asks, is there a way to create a view that has the task view at the top and the entire Gantt on the bottom?
Is there a way to create a view with the task on the top and the entire Gantt on the bottom? So I believe this is a question for the client. So let's just go back to our client for a moment. And the answer is, and he said entire Gantt on the bottom. And I think that's really going to be the part that we're not going to be able to do. But let's just talk about this briefly. So the idea is if I want to show, now let's just do this. Let's go into a dual pane view here real quickly and say, hey, look, I really would like to have on the top, let's just put the Gantt chart. So if I go up here to more views and I select my Gantt chart on the top, notice I have the Gantt chart on the bottom, right? Or if I want to take a task sheet view here, so if I right click on the top and say, hey, listen, let's just change that to the task sheet. Really, here's the task, no Gantt chart, but I want that whole kind of timeline view on the bottom. In the client, basically Project Pro or Project Standard, the top pane drives your bottom pane. So in many cases, this is where you kind of say, how do I kind of visualize this? The idea is that the top pane will filter the bottom pane, and that way allows you to have views or reports there. So I think if we just talk about simply natively, that's not going to happen. However, another option that you may want to think about is if we talk about creating a new window, right? Now this is what we talk about in terms of a master project, is that if you have two projects or if you have two options open, you can kind of visualize these. And if, for example, if I go ahead and click on well, so I can do window. We create a master project, but we still have that top pane, bottom pane. The other is what we call arrange all. And again, these are two different files, so I'm not quite sure if he's asking in the same file or if it's two different files. But I hate to say the short answer, at least to the client, is that you're not going to have the full Gantt chart on the bottom unless you have a visualization of that in a separate file. Because the whole idea of the top and the bottom is to drive from a dual pane to a single pane. Great question.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead.
The next question is from Brady, and he asks, is there an easy way to turn off which bar styles show up in the printed project footer? The style will be included if it's preceded by an asterisk, etc.
Okay, so whoops, let me just close that file real quickly, and I'll just maximize this for us to see. So I think we're talking about printing, right? And the idea is that if I go in and say, hey, let's just do a file, let's go ahead and hit print, and let's bring up that information. I believe he's referring to the legend down here, which shows you just about everything in the kitchen sink in terms of some of these. So a couple things about the legend is in terms of turning on and off the legend. If you come into page setup, you can go to the legend, and what you're able to do is just say none, or you can actually identify, whether you want to set which type of labels you have in your header or footer. But if in terms of, I believe the question is really how do I select, I think if I'm right, Brady, it's, you know, how do I pick and choose which pieces I want? That's really tied to what you have in the bar styles. So the idea is that if I actually go into bar styles, every one of these objects that I create here is going to be shown basically in my legend if I actually have turned that feature on. So if you have a deadline, it includes that. So what I might suggest that you do is you streamline your bar styles, simply removing things so that they're not there, and that will eliminate what will show up at least in the legend. So yeah, it's not like you can go in and kind of check a box saying I include just these things in on the top or bottom of the legend. You really are at the mercy of what the bar styles are saying for the basically the print preview option. That's a great question.
Thanks.
Good.
The next question comes from a PPM team, and they ask, am I correct that these kinds of customizations in Microsoft Project Views cannot be applied permanently to enterprise views in Project Online, Project Server? You have to do this in local views in the project.
That is not a correct assumption. So the idea of me having this really cool printing or agile table is that if I open up the Enterprise Global template, if you're in basically Project Online or Project Server on-premise, basically the PPM version of this, is that you could move these objects into the Enterprise Global. So not just the custom fields, right? So for example, if I was the administrator, and just watch this, I'll right-click on Work Slip, go to Custom Fields, is I certainly can promote them from the client to the enterprise. Again, I sometimes will do that as administrators. I will build it, I'll test it, go. It might have a lookup table, it might not. I may want to promote that up. But these tables, basically the things that we see in our organizer here, these objects that we see in the organizer can also be loaded into your Enterprise Global template, which means everyone who connects to Project Online or Project Server will get these objects raining down directly into their project schedule. Now I do tell you, if you're going to do that, please do me a favor, don't like replace entry, right? There's a couple native ones, so don't delete the native ones, but give it something that has a value that refers to an enterprise field, table, filter, you know, import, export map, all of that. So the idea is that you really do have some great flexibility of saying, hey, I can just also put it in enterprise and have that rain down. Now, some of the formatting that I'm showing here, and if maybe this might help clarify, is that some of the things I am showing here I can put into an online environment, but the bar styles, where we're kind of showing this formatting, doesn't have the same rich formatting capability in Project Online or Project Server as we do with the client. So you are able to create certain bar styles, but it's not anywhere near as rich as the client. So in that sense, that might be a true statement, at least the bar styles over here on the right.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. We are hitting 1 o'clock here, so the end of our time. There are a couple questions that I apologize we weren't able to get to. But Tim, I don't know if you want to share some contact if people want to reach out to you with additional questions.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm showing my screen right now. So if you like some of the templates I have, absolutely email me. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I teach, I speak. We've got things out on YouTube if you want to go watch some free videos. Again, MPUG is an awesome watering hole for you guys to go and get great information. So if you want to just email me at tim.runcie@advisacon.com, I'm happy to maybe follow up with any questions, or if you need a demo or at least some of the templates. And certainly you can reach out to me with LinkedIn. But again, this is a great place to be, and I'm very proud to be a sponsor and supporter of MPUG.